Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NBG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. And as you are listening to this, I hope that you had a Merry Christmas. We are in the Kwanzaa season now and getting ready to get rid of 2025 and get into 2026. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. It's time for a new year. It really is. I don't know about you, but at one point it seemed like the year was going fast, and then it just started dragging. And I don't know if it was the burden of all this foolishness we got going on in Washington and some of the states or whatever it was. But if you are listening to this, you then made it to the home stretch, and we're about ready to get into a brand new year. And I hope that 2026 is prosperous and joyful for you as well as your family and everyone else. This is going to be the last show for the year. I'm going to take a break. Grace has already started her break, so we won't have the news segment this episode. We're just going to go straight into the guests. And you're going to enjoy these two sisters. Excuse me. They're both educators, and one has written these incredible books that correlate Mississippi's civil rights history with education and how to apply those lessons in today's education system. And then we got another sister who is following in the legacy of one of our great civil rights icons and in the field of education, trying to lift up our youth. So I hope that you enjoy these episodes. These interviews, I should say, and enjoy this episode. Still looking for subscribers. So you can go to patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming, or you can go to momenterik.com. And if you go to the podcast website, momenterik.com, then you can, not only subscribe, but you can also contact us if you want to be a guest. If you got something you want to talk about, we'll, see if we can get you on. And, just understand I'm booked through June. Praise the Lord. So, if that tickles your fancy, if that's what you want to do, if you want to learn something about me and all this stuff, you just go to momenterik.com and you can handle all of that stuff. So again, I just greatly appreciate y'all for listening. So let's go ahead and get this started. My first guest is Dr. Marlee Bunch. Dr. Marlee S. Bunch is an interdisciplinary educator, scholar, author, and preserver of oral histories dedicated to illuminating untold stories and fostering human-centered, inclusive learning spaces. With over a decade of teaching experience across secondary and post-secondary classrooms, she has consistently championed equitable, rigorous, and reflective education that honors the lived experiences of students and educators alike. A passionate advocate for justice-centered education, Dr. Bunch earned her doctoral degree in education, policy, organization, and leadership with an emphasis on diversity and equity from the University of Illinois. She also holds a Master's of Education in Secondary Education from DePaul University, an MS degree in Gifted Education, and an ESL certification, a testament to her commitment to meeting the diverse needs of learners. She is a National Academy of Education Spencer Doctoral Fellow. At the heart of Dr. Bunch's work is the belief that history and storytelling hold transformative power. Her research centers on the oral histories of Black female educators in Mississippi who taught during the Civil Rights era, 1954 to 1971. Preserving their narratives is both historical record and source of contemporary wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Marlee Bunch. All right, Dr. Marlee Bunch, happy holidays to you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy holidays to you. It's great to be here with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you on. You caught my attention, and I'll get into that during the interview, but I wanted to talk to you about your work in education. But of course, it's a political show, so we got to tie in politics some kind of way. But I normally start off the interview with a couple of icebreakers. So
Okay.
The first icebreaker is a quote. And the quote is, "Let us not ever forget such things."
Yeah.
What does that quote mean to you?
Oh, I read that quote. It has been probably a good 15 years since I first encountered us from Carol Meso's Ava. And it's interesting because I think that quote has carried through my work, has been such a thread that runs. Let us not forget our history, the people who have shaped us. I think of my grandmother when I hear that quote. Yeah, I just think it's beautiful. I think it reminds us of all of the deep legacies that run throughout our history and lives.
All right. So now the next icebreaker is what I call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
Ooh, 8.
Okay. What is one thing you hope the current administration will do or not do during their term?
I hope that we can restore the damage that has occurred around the removal of history and stories. I'm thinking specifically about our museums, and make sure that all history is protected and that we represent true history for our current and future generations.
So you're hoping that they fix what they broke, is what you're saying.
Yes, I'm hoping they restore some of that damage that has occurred.
Yes, ma'am. What was it about Mississippi between 1954 and 1971 that inspired you to write 2 books based upon that period?
Yeah. Well, my grandmother taught in Hattiesburg, Mississippi for almost 40 years, and she passed away, before I was born. So I didn't know that history, her history and her teaching history. Of course, I've been in education now for a long, long time. So I think that was kind of the first seed that was planted. And then the other piece is my mentor, Dr. Christopher Spann, happens to also study Mississippi. And he has often talked about how Mississippi really represents what the greater country is grappling with. So I think during that time, especially during the civil rights movement, Mississippi, I think, would be a place that most people would write off. Yes, it's got racial violence, it's poor, it's this, it's that. But out of Mississippi came these amazing movements that really helped shape the civil rights movement. And these, what Dr. Joyce Ladner would call race women and race men who were just dedicated to making sure that things like the murder of Emmett Till, that inequitable voting rights, things of that nature stopped. And so I think Mississippi is just this beautiful place we know the kind of sad or darker history of Mississippi, but I love the both and about it, in that out of Mississippi were these great educators and these folks who really, I think, helped shape pathways for me and for educators and people today.
Yeah. Well, that was what got my attention. I was like, wow, she's really getting into it. And it was like, I know I've met one of the people that you talked to in the book, one of the Dahmer ladies.
Yeah, Betty or Mrs. Ellie Dahmer.
I can't remember which, I might have met both of them because, because I spent over half my life in Mississippi, and during I was real active. That's where I get my political background from. I served in the state legislature there and ran for the U.S. Senate there. So during my time running for the U.S. Senate, whenever I went to Hattiesburg, I had to go to the Dahmer's church. So I think I know I've met both of them. And then, so yeah, it was just, and I agree with you about the both and as far as Mississippi goes. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about Mississippi, but I do tell Mississippi that what you see when you talk about, oh, well, what about Biloxi and, the Gulf Coast? I said, that's our postcard, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we send out to say, come on in. But if you go north of I-10, it's like, now that's the real Mississippi. That's not to say that Biloxi's not real, but when you talk about the cotton and the sweet tea and football and all that stuff, the good and the bad, that's north of I-10.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that, were engaged in Mississippi politics were educators.
Yeah.
My political mentor was Henry Kirksey. He worked for the Black School District. He actually ran their printing press. And then he ended up drawing the maps that gave all those Black folks opportunity to serve in the legislature. I can think of Miss Pittman, Mr. Cooper. I just, the young lady that beat me when I tried to go for a third term, her dad was Campbell. They were. So a lot of Mississippi politics is tied into the educators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was, it's fascinating. So that's why you caught my attention with that. Why is mentorship powerful?
Oh, gosh. I've told this story a couple times. I have been a mentor to many, many of my students, and I'm so proud that I have been able to be part of their legacy and help shape their world in some small way. But I never had a mentor, if we're thinking about outside of family members, growing up in schools. And I think I always really, really wanted one. And so I met my mentor when I was working on my doctorate at the University of Illinois. And then I also, started doing these oral history interviews, and many of those participants became mentors. And I think they just shape how we look at ourselves. I think even when we see good in ourselves, mentors hold up that mirror and help you see the best in yourself. And I think everybody needs that guidance. Even, I think, we kind of sometimes reduce it to like when you're growing up. No, I think we all need a mentor, someone to say, I can aspire to be this. And that mentor is there to kind of guide you, as you're learning and growing, which is ongoing even through adulthood. So I think mentorship, and, I learned that through my interviews, was such a formative piece of education during that time. There weren't a lot of resources per se, but what the resource that was so rich was the mentorship that came, as you mentioned, from educators, from community members. And I think that that's such a important piece of growing and learning. And especially when you're thinking about working towards changing social conditions and, the global world, I think you need mentorship to help you navigate all of that.
Now, when you said you were a mentor, how did that work? Did students come to you, or did you kind of pick out some students and say, let me guide you along the way?
I would say most of the students who needed me found me. And it was interesting because a lot of times it was the students that I think other teachers might have typecasted as, oh, you're the bad kid, you're the kid that blah, blah, blah. And those are my favorite kids, and they always found me. And I think, did a good job at showing them you are not necessarily what people see on paper. Because I think I had experienced that in school, right? On paper, I was one thing, but really, I was just looking for someone to kind of open that door and say, do all of the things you're capable of doing. But yeah, I keep in touch with many of my students today. Some of them I've known for now over 15 years, and I'm so proud of them. I always say any leadership that I have, I credit to them because they were so important in my journey as a teacher and learning with them.
Yeah. I had mentioned Henry Kirksey, so it was kind of the opposite. He kind of sought me out. It was like me and about 3 or 4 other individuals that he kind of took an interest in. And I'm very grateful. He changed my life path, changed a couple of times. The traditional, I was going to school to go to law school. Things didn't work out. That's a whole nother podcast. I could probably do multi episodes on that. And then I was thinking about going into the Marine Corps. And because he wanted to run for mayor, he said, I need you to be the campaign manager. So that gave me my out from going into the Marine Corps. I still probably would have ended up where I am politically, but it definitely changed the trajectory of where I got elected and how I got elected and all that.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And when I ran, I know you see when people campaign, they say, well, so-and-so endorsed this candidate and so-and-so did. I had 2 people endorse me. It was my pastor and Senator Kirksey.
Wow.
And I got in. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that trajectory part, I think you said it so well. That's that part, right? I mean, I think any of us who have had a great mentor, we can name the moment where it shifted our path or our trajectory. And that people just don't forget it ever, right? Like that's like a lifelong gift. And so, yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
All right. So I want you to explain a couple of things. First, break down the Unhush framework.
Yeah. Before I break it down, so the Unhush framework was born out of the oral history interviews that I did with Hattiesburg educators and also their students, right? I wanted to hear from the students who are actually in the classrooms of these women. And as a teacher, I wanted to kind of also figure out what were they doing in their pedagogy, in their curriculum, in their mobilizing of community that helped students walk out not only affirmed, but, had academic rigor. And so I kind of, through my themes of my interviews, figured out the strands that were throughout and then came up with a framework to help teachers today who are trying to figure out how do I create culturally responsive classrooms. We know that most educators are white women, and so I wanted to figure out what can I create that serves as a guide to help any educator really who's trying to figure out a blueprint to creating these rich classroom experiences. So the Unhush framework was born out of that, and the title Unhush is really to remind us, and as one of my participants and I talked about this idea of being hushed, and Dr. Joyce Ladner talked about how her generation, which she calls the Emmett Till generation, was never hushed because there wasn't an option, right? It was a matter of hearing that clarion call and making sure that things like Emmett Till's murder never happened again. So there was fear, but there was never I'm going to be silent. And I thought that was really important. So that's what that word reminds us of, right? That we always have to use our voices and advocate for change. So the U stands for Uniting for Collective Effort. As we know, that was so important in SNCC, in the March on Washington. All of things that happened throughout the movement in that era were done collectively. The N is being able to kind of name our positionality, understand our lens, what misinformation we come with, what bias, what experiences we walk into spaces with. The H is for understanding that all histories are valuable, and especially making sure that we're illuminating underrepresented histories. That U piece is for unlearning. I think as educators and people, we have a job to make sure that we are always doing the work of unlearning and relearning through reflection, through education, whatever it may be. The S is for stories, because I think stories is really one of those things that can unite us. It's also what prevents erasure and helps make sure that future generations have this history and information. And so I think those components, and the H is for healing, because ultimately we all want to be working towards this idea of healing collectively and individually, which we know is an ongoing process. And so those principles, if you're thinking about as a teacher, for example, bringing in a new text or designing a lesson plan for your classroom, those components, if they're present, really kind of give you a marker to say, okay, I at least have the beginning foundations of curricula or a text that's going to be enriching for my students and help to build what we would want, which is a culturally responsive learning space.
Okay. I'm going to rephrase the question. I was going to do this question a certain way, but I'm going to do it different. Because it was like the second thing I wanted you to explain was the 6 lessons from the past. So let me make it out of community, civic engagement, creativity, mentoring, the whole child and lifelong learning. Which one do you think is the most important? Because you listed them all, so they have their place. But which one do you kind of like get into more?
Oh, that's so hard. I would say lifelong learning is probably one of those that it would be one of my top 2 that if I had to pick. I think one of the stories that really just struck me was how many of my participants talked about continuing their education. And when we think about doing this during segregated Jim Crow, I just was like, wow. And I'm complaining about, student loans, but wow. My mother would talk about how my grandmother in the summers, would leave, even though there was a college right there, right down the road. She would have to leave the state and go elsewhere to continue her education. So that dedication to continuously perfecting craft, to expanding knowledge, I just was like, that's such a important thing that has been fought for. We don't even sometimes realize that, but most of the women that I interviewed all had master's degrees. And that was just like, wow. Because I think sometimes, especially, Eurocentric history books and courses in elementary, middle school, high school, they frame this narrative that, education in the Black community is not valued. And it's so false. And so to hear these women talk about making sure that they were continuing their education, there weren't scholarships and grants and things like that happening. So this was a financial burden. It was, it involved traveling. Just all of the things. And so that I think struck me as like, when we say lifelong learning, it took on a whole new meaning.
You touched on something when you said the stereotype is that the black community doesn't value education. Mm-hmm. First of all, I agree with you. That's totally ludicrous because it was like that was the thing that was always stressed. My mom was an educator. My dad was like a math major and all this stuff, and he couldn't understand why I didn't understand math, right? And I mean, but it was understood. You're going to college. You know what I'm saying? We went to college, you going to college,
That's right.
and for some of my classmates or whatever, they were going to be the first ones to go. Right. And so, it was just important. And, but I think if we get into it a little more, it's like when we looked at education, you and you're younger than me, but we come basically from the same background where it's like education equated freedom. Mm-hmm. And, maybe there's the generations after us look at education as money, right? As status. And it's not, so they don't value it the same way, but it's still valued because they're looking for a way out from where they are or a step up. But it may be how the degree or the type of value we put on education might be different. But it's a total misnomer to say that Black folks don't value education.
Yeah. I think, discovering the work of Vanessa Siddle Walker, and people like Gloria Ladson Billings, but Vanessa Siddle Walker, I leaned on heavily for my research. Dr. Chris Spann's book, From Cottonfield to Schoolhouse, and all of that history tells us the exact opposite of what oftentimes our false history books in schools tell. And so, part of my goal in documenting this is I want to make sure that people and readers, and specifically, I think about my students and my own children. I want them to know the names and the stories and the history correctly. And I think what's so beautiful about Mississippi history is it illustrates how everyday people from maybe circumstances that are less than ideal can do these incredible things. And so that's just such a beautiful part of our history that I think is skipped over. And so my goal, I remember when I first said to my participant, Charles Cooper, who really has become like a father figure to me, and I said, I am going to make sure that these histories are recorded, because I just was so honored and proud to hear all of the many things that they were able to do. And, he talks about so often that it's also a misnomer that segregated communities were these terrible, horrible things. And, he said, when I was growing up, like, we had Black businesses and Black dentists and doctors. And, you look at Mobile Street and it would be lined with, Black professionals. And he said, I wanted to be a teacher because I had teachers who were mentors and, incredibly dedicated to the craft. And so, he said, I wish that my children could have experienced actually what it would have been like, what I had being in Black spaces. So I thought that narrative was also very important to make sure that people understood, yes, there was the realities of Jim Crow and of violence, but the both and piece comes in, and Black communities did well. And most of my participants talked about how that shifted after desegregation. And it was an unfortunate shift. Yeah.
Yeah. How do those principles or frameworks help leverage artificial intelligence?
Oh, goodness. You mean bring about the book? That book? Yeah. Because I think here, AI is here. And I know, as a English teacher by trade, I've had the same probably concerns as many of us, which is like, what is this going to do to our students' ability to analyze, to write, to think? But I think, and I say it in the AI book, teachers have gone through, learning how to deal with smart boards, the World Wide Web being introduced, overhead projectors. I mean, I think one of the things that good teachers do well is we know how to pivot and we know how to use tools in the way that they're meant to be used and keep learning human-centered. And so I'm like, there are some great tools. There are some great AI tools for ELL learners. There are some worthwhile things that I think if we use them responsibly and we teach our students how to use them and also teach our students about the harms of AI, that would make for some really interesting, Socratic seminars and discussions because AI, it's a trip, right? I mean, we know like it is not equitable. It has racial bias, all of which comes from humans, so like what I just think about like my high school kids would have loved debating that or talking about that and looking at those tools. So I think there are tools out there that are worthwhile, but we have to make sure that really what we're doing when we work with our students is we are co-creating with them and we are modeling how to responsibly use these tools. And like I said, making sure that we're analyzing and we're looking at both the benefits and the harms. I think that piece is really important. But it's not going away. So we've got to find a way to kind of grapple with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really interesting. I just remind people when I talk about it that, it's getting this information from us.
That's right.
So if you take away the human element, then AI is not worth anything because it's not going to get its source. So we've always got to be creative. We've always got to push the norm so that way AI can catch up with us. I think a lot of people have gotten to this point where we're surrendering to AI. I don't know, but I just wanted to, since you wrote a book about that, I just wanted to tap into that a little bit.
Yeah, we wrote that book, my co-author, Brittany Collins, and I really wrote it because we were like, at the same point, I think all of us have been at, which is like, what are we going to do with this? And so it was really kind of a great way for us to explore how to do it in a way that would benefit and not harm students.
Yeah. I was just trying to visualize how the people that you did the research with would have dealt with that.
Yeah. Right? That's a really good question. And actually that's a question I think they would say, this is when we have to teach history and this is why history is so important because some of these sites, there's a magic school, I think it is, and you can say like, give me a lesson about the civil rights movement and it'll give you one in 10 seconds. It's pretty frightening. So where, reading and understanding true history comes in is if you would read through this lesson that it spits out, you could identify, oh, this person was not in the movement or this person who should not be absent isn't here. So yeah, I think there's some great ways to teach students how to do deeper analysis and ask better questions. But we just have to be willing to I think that's where our own learning comes in, right? You ask me what's the most important. I mean, lifelong learning, things change and shift every day. And so as educators, I don't think we're ever finished with expanding our knowledge and craft.
Yeah. You write your books to improve the pedagogy of schools, especially those in the Black community. Can you apply the knowledge you impart into politics and how?
Into politics. I mean, I think education is political. It's always been political in the sense that we know education was not created for Black and brown folks, right? Not with us in mind. And so when I think about like liberatory education, I think that is an act of resistance. So I think that makes it political. I don't know, other than to just teach bravely. I've had teachers say like, well, I don't want to get, fired. I don't want to get in trouble. So how do I do this? And I mean, that was never a question for me, right? As an educator, I always knew that information and students and families were number one. So I think it's political in the sense that now it is, especially now, it is asking teachers, and that includes, our majority of white teachers, to unhush, to teach bravely, to sometimes challenge curriculum and policies. And all of those things are political.
Yeah. When I was thinking of this, when I was writing this question down, I was thinking about an experience I had. I was teaching at Piney Woods Country Life School, and the normal curriculum is like Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, and for some reason, the principal of the elementary school came in when I was teaching, and I wasn't talking about I Have a Dream. I was talking about Operation Breadbasket and the founding of the SCLC, and how Dr. King had pivoted to Chicago and all that kind of stuff. And he pulled me to the side afterwards. He said, "Yeah, Mr. Fleming, that's not in the curriculum. It's like, why are you doing that?" And I said, "Because this is a black school. If I was at a white school, I know I'd be pushing the limit. But here, it's like the fact that this school exists is against the norm, right? The oldest black boarding school in America." And I said, if you got a problem with me expanding the lesson, right? They know that I have a dream speech. They could all probably do it at the auditorium. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
But it's like, it's not about that. And you know that because you lived through that. And he just kind of said, "Well, Mr. Fleming, just in case." I said, "Okay, well, just in case, tell him to come talk to me." And, but there wasn't any feedback, negative feedback off that. But I just thought about that when you were talking about, being brave in teaching. And I think that, first of all, I have a high regard for educators. I have a high regard for historians and all that. And I don't understand why people are afraid to do and I'm also a Christian. So part of my faith is understanding that enlightenment is what we're trying to get to, right? We need to know as much as we can, right? That all that's on the earth, if we're supposed to have quote unquote dominion, then we need to know what we're overseeing, right? And so I just never understood the fear that comes with education, with the pressure but a lot of that is political, and we definitely are seeing that now.
Yeah.
In this political climate. All right. So let me close out with these two, because it's kind of a theme. And, the other guests I'm going to have on, I'm going to ask them the same questions. Do you want things for Black folks to be better, easier, or more impactful?
Oh, ask it one more time.
Do you want things for Black folks to be better, easier, or more impactful?
I would say more impactful, because I think more impactful embodies that better piece. And I don't think we've ever had it easier. And I think that we've been okay with not having it easier. So to me, it's like, oh, skip that one. The more impactful piece, I think, is the one that resonates with me. I want things to be more impactful.
Now, I disagree with you, but it's not a gotcha kind of question. It's just, see, I'm the one that wants it to be easier, right? For that very point you mentioned, that it hasn't been easy for us. See, because to me, impactful, if somebody asked me the question, I'd say impactful, what's going on now is impacting me, right? In a negative sense. So I don't know, impact could be good or bad, right? Better is like, I've got it better now than my parents had because I have a little more access. I got this nice little phone where I can talk to you. I got these, computers, all this kind of stuff. They didn't have all that, right? And so that's better. But to me, easier, because it's like, whenever we get to a point where you just say, I want society to be like sports, right? It's like, I'm a big sports fan. and a Chicago fan at that. And so it's like all Chicago ever wanted was a quarterback for the Bears. It's like, just play the game at a high level, right? Didn't matter if he's black, white, Native American, Latino. It don't matter. If you can throw that ball to the receivers when we need it to win the game for us, that's all that matters. And the Bears have had their share of different type of quarterbacks. So it's like, but that's the standard. The standard is not what you look like. The standard is not where you came from. The standard is, can you play at that high level? And we're going to give you the tools to do what you need to do. You're going to have a coach. You're going to have a playbook. You're going to have a football. You're going to have the right equipment. You're going to have a trainer. You're going to have all the things, right? To be successful. We just want to see what you can do with all of that. And my thing is that if society was like that, Black folks would be way better off. So that's why I tend to go with easier. But, like I said, it's not a gotcha question.
No. But
it's just to kind of pick a brain and see where people are.
That's a great question. I think when I hear the word easier, I am like, with it, because I think sometimes there's like a dumbing down. I remember my son was in the NICU for many, many, many months. And literally every day, a nurse or a doctor would say to my husband and I, "You all are so articulate." And my husband's very calm, but at one point he was like, we're both educated, right? I mean, like, why do we keep saying this? And so I think when I hear easier, I think of the dumbing down and the surprised reaction that people have when they're like, oh, you have a doctorate or you're blah, blah, blah. Some of my participants even talked about, never being really acknowledged for their accolades and intellect and education. And so I'm like, when I hear easier, I thought about that. And so it was like, oh, no, we don't want easier, right? We don't want we don't want the dumbing down or the, hey, I think sometimes in classrooms, right, we think we don't need it to be rigorous for these kids. And so, that word for me, I'm like, But you're right. Yeah, your perspective is good.
Yeah, I when you said articulate, it was like in the South, they say, you're so well spoken. That's what they hit you with.
All right.
All right, my final closing question. Finish this sentence. I have hope because
of young generations. I have hope because I think about my students. I think about some of the pre-service teachers that I've been lucky enough to mentor. And they are, I feel like, determined to make our world more just and equitable. And so I have hope because of them.
Okay. So, Dr. Marlee Bunch, how can people get in touch with you? How can people get your books? All that stuff.
Thank you for asking that. Yes, they can order Unlearning the Hush or The Magnitude of Us on Amazon.com, or you can get them from the University of Illinois Press, where Unlearning the Hush is. Magnitude of Us is Teachers College Press. Instagram is at Unlearning the Hush. And you can reach out to me also on my website, which is marleebunch.com.
Well, Dr. Marlee Bunch, I greatly appreciate you coming on during this holiday season.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed the conversation. And the rule is now that since you have been on the show, you have an open invitation to come back.
Yay! Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you don't even have to wait for me to ask it. You say, Erik, I need to talk about something. We'll get you on a microphone.
I appreciate you.
So again, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so it is time for my next guest, Dr. Patrice Fenton. Dr. Patrice E. Fenton is co-founder and head of organizational well-being at the Ella Baker Institute. She is a proud mom of 3, Brooklyn, New York native, and former NYC Department of Education middle school special educator. Dr. Fenton has cultivated an expertise as an equity-centered strategist with a passion for leadership development, teacher education, and generating collective wellness, particularly in Black communities. She is a highly skilled facilitator and has deep experience in leadership and organizational development, as well as measurement and evaluation, particularly regarding impact in Black and Brown communities. Dr. Fenton is the former director of leader support and development at EdLock, a nonprofit professional network organization of over 1,000 education leaders of color across 30-plus states. She also served as the first associate director of the mayoral initiative NYC Men Teach at the City University of New York, as well as an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Special Education at Hunter College. Dr. Fenton has co-authored a book set for release in March 2026 entitled The Promise of Collective Leadership. She is also co-host of the Educate US podcast along with her co-author, Dr. Stacy Schultz. She holds 4 degrees, including a PhD in teaching and learning with a concentration in special education from the University of Miami and a bachelor's in business administration from Temple University. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Patrice Fenton. All right. Dr. Patrice Fenton. How you doing, sister? You doing good?
I am well. I really, really am very grateful. I stay in gratitude.
Well, happy holidays to you. It's good to see you. I had the privilege of being on your podcast, you and Dr. Schultz. And so now both of you all have been on my podcast. So it's been a good thing.
Indeed.
But I definitely wanted to get you on because you are doing some incredible work. And I wanted to highlight it, especially the name of the organization you work for. And I want to get into that a little bit. So before we get started on the interview part, I do a couple of icebreakers.
Okay.
So the first icebreaker is a quote. And your quote is, "If I fall, I'll fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom." What does that quote mean to you?
It means being willing to submit oneself to the mission and cause of one's work, the calling and mission and cause of one's work, the purpose, being willing to give one's all to what you're doing. It calls to mind the energy and the spirit of servant leadership, essentially, which is what I consider myself and the folks that I lock arms with consider themselves, and why our organization carries the name that it does.
Yeah. All right. And now the second icebreaker is what we call 20 questions.
Okay.
Give me a number between 1 and 20.
I'm going to go with 6. That's the first number that came to mind.
All right. What do you think was the worst or best thing the previous administration did?
Ooh. Okay. I'm going to go with you said current or previous, so I'm going to go with current.
No. The option is, what do you think was the worst or best thing the previous administration did?
Previous. Okay. I thought you gave me option of current or previous. Okay. The previous administration did. Oh, let's see. Well, if I'm being honest, this is not the first thing that comes to mind, honestly. And this is like, it connects to my work. It's not necessarily what the administration did. So I'm going to kind of like deviate a little bit from your question. It's more so what the party did. But in my opinion, putting someone in office who is, I'll say, as advanced in age as our former last president was, I think is a mistake. And I don't say that from a space of being ageist. I say it from a space of really understanding that the promise, the hope, the purpose of tomorrow is for our young people. And so I think along with that, not prioritizing, not centering, not positioning young people to be at the helm of change in this country is one of the worst things that we could do. There was not enough, I'm a former educator, forever learner. So I come from the perspective of having been in the classroom, also a parent. I have a 21-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So a full spectrum of young people who I'm blessed to steward in this life. So my perspective has been and always will be that young people are the ones, they're the ones that inherit everything, but that they know best. And so I just did not see enough done to secure, to advance, to improve education in this country. And that's just not the previous administration. That's pretty much every administration, if I'm being honest. So that's one. Connected to that is, what happens in our schools, specifically, largely, and then more specifically, what happens with our teachers. So not enough done to honor the work and effort that goes into what I consider one of the noblest professions that one could take on. I mean, Stacey and I talk about this quite often, as do my comrades at the Ella Baker Institute. The fact that every person, school is compulsory in this country, so every person has to go through it. So it's a prime place really to support what happens to us, at the local level and at the state, national level. And we haven't really seen the type of attention toward the education sector that is required and I think necessary to advance this country in ways that are truly progressive and transformative.
Yeah. So I don't know if you follow sports or anything, but there was something that happened recently in sports that reminds me of what you talked about with the 2020 presidential election. The Indianapolis Colts lost their starting quarterback. Their backup quarterback was already out with an injury. So they went and got a guy who had played, who was literally eligible for the Hall of Fame this year. Got him from coaching a high school team, and he played last night. He played the last two games with them. And so I was just thinking about when you were talking about President Biden, and it's just kind of like the Democratic Party was just like the Indianapolis Colts. They didn't see any other option better or was ready to step in at that point and felt he was the best option. And I agree with you. That's not ideal. If the Joe Biden of 1988 or the Joe Biden of the Joe Biden of 2000 or 2008 was the option, okay. But, 2020 Joe Biden was not the same, especially when it got down to 2024. But he was better than the alternative, but he wasn't the best option. And that the only thing that's different, I think, in the sports analogy and the political analogy is that I don't think it's stunted the growth of the party or stunted the progressive politics, because it gave, I think, time for some of the people that we would want to lift up some time to get some more experience, get out there on the national stage a little more without the pressure of being president. And by 2028, we'll have a heck of a draft class.
That's a good silver lining to look forward to. That is true. Yeah.
All right. So how did Dr. Patrice Fenton come to be?
Mm, that's a powerful question. I appreciate that. A few things come to mind when I hear the question posed in that way. One, I think of Brooklyn, where I'm born and raised. I am a very proud Brooklynite, Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn, I would say, my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, they all poured into me tremendously to make me the woman that I am today. Brooklyn is also on that list for me. Brooklyn really is a true, they call New York City a melting pot, and I'm not really, I question how much we really are and or were because, Brooklyn, I like to say, is more like a quilt. So there are different cultures and ethnicities that commingle, but they also like hold down their own separate spaces. If we're being honest, they don't necessarily melt as much as we might like to think that they do. However, proximity is a thing. So we get to experience each other. And I think that is the magic of Brooklyn. So there's just so much. It's just so rich. One of my favorite things, people go on vacation, all kinds of places all over the world. I contend that Brooklyn is like one of the best places to be in the summer. Is you just walk down the street and you never know what you're going to run into. It could be an old friend, a fair, a new restaurant, a festival, a random concert, right? Like it's just so rich. So that is an indelible part of the fabric of who I am. And it informs the lens that I have on the world. So my idea of community is very much like that. It makes space for, it's inclusive. This is one of those buzzwords today, but it really is a part of how I see the world because of where I was raised. So that is a huge part of how I came to be. The other thing that comes up for me is my grandmother. I talk a lot about her. She passed in 2020, not from COVID, but she was just a really incredible connector, I would say. And so my idea of community, which drives what I do today, I didn't realize it until I started doing this work that it comes from her. She was a home-based child care provider and lived across the street for a good portion of her life from an elementary school, well, also a school which I attended. Before that, she lived in Bed-Stuy, and she was just always that person in her neighborhood, wherever she lived, that pretty much anyone that was in her radius could rely on. So I tell this story, like if you live downstairs, you needed a cup of sugar, you needed to borrow $5 to go to the corner store, you needed to come over because, your son is locked up and he has to make a collect call, you can't receive them. She would say, oh, come over, let me know what time he's calling, I'll make sure no one else is. She was just really that person in the neighborhood for a lot of people. And so I didn't realize it until very recently that I patterned a lot of my work, a lot of my leadership after her. It wasn't a conscious decision, but it by, again, proximity and also by observation and just in part being raised by her, alongside my parents, it just became a part of who I am and how I show up. So I would be remiss if I didn't name Elizabeth Butler as a huge part of how I came to be as well.
Yeah. So another lady that seems to have had an impact in your life is Ella Baker. And you are the leader of the Ella Baker Institute. So for the listeners, tell us who Ella Baker was.
So Ella Baker, I like to say that I had two EBs in my life. So my grandmother, Elizabeth Butler, and then the other Ella Baker, Ella Baker. Ella Baker is essentially responsible for all the prominent names in the civil rights movement that we know so well. Your Martin Luther King, your Rosa Parks. She was the force behind those major names. She was an indelible and remarkable community organizer during that time, who essentially saw leadership as something that everybody was endowed with. And so she was very against this idea of having one charismatic leader out front in the spirit of your Martin Luther Kings, right? So he came to be because of a lot of different things, a hodgepodge of factors, right? Of which she played a part. She was a huge part in how he became to be a central figure in the civil rights movement. But she contended that that's not necessary for the type of change that we want to see in our communities. In fact, it's very opposite. Her thinking was that the people themselves can lead themselves. They know best what their conditions are. They know best what kinds of changes need to be made. And so her work was really centered around positioning folks in community to be the levers of change for themselves, to not wait on anyone to come along and save them, but to do it for themselves. She, in addition to that, she really highlighted and dedicated herself to the notion of youth leadership. So we talk about SNCC and all these other prominent organizations, but very particularly SNCC. She was a big force behind all of the young people that came up through that organization, and really a huge part, if not one of the biggest, depending on who you talk to, of the change that we were able to see as a result of all of the freedom fighters during that time period. So she's just one of those immense figures that did not care to be celebrated because the work and the people were paramount to her. And so we decided to take on the name both to in honor of just because we are folks who honor our ancestors, but also because not in defiance of what she stood for, but in celebration of what she stood for, right? She did not want to be, I'm sure there's a part of her ethos where she would not want to be named the namesake of an organization, right? That's just who she was for her entire career, for her entire life. But we hold up her name because not many people know about her, and also because it is the spirit of her work and her work ethic that we carry as part of what we do in our organization.
Yeah. She was very, very, as far as history goes, and like you said, she wanted it that way to a degree, but I still believe that people that's done the work, that carried the water like she did, should be recognized. So I am glad that you named the institute after her, and trying to carry on the work, and that'll be my question when I get to it. But I just wanted to say, the quote that you responded to was from Fannie Lou Hamer,
Mm-hmm.
who basically came right after her. Some people would say they're contemporaries, but Fannie Lou was younger, and
Mm-hmm.
and she kind of emulated Miss Baker a little bit, because a lot of people that I ended up interacting with when I got to Mississippi in the movement were like her proteges, like Dr. McLemore and Hollis Watkins and those guys, but Miss Baker kind of laid the groundwork, because when you talk about young people, we're talking about people like John Lewis. We're talking about people like Julian Bond and
Right.
Al Raby and well, Bayard wasn't young, but Bayard she kind of set the metronome for him to do some of the stuff he did. You know what I'm saying? They worked well together. Those are the kind of people that she mentored. And so you having the distinction of carrying that legacy on, I think is incredible. So my specific question is, what is the Ella Baker Institute, and how does the Institute follow that legacy?
Yeah. So EBI, as we call it, is an organization that centers leadership development and community well-being. Those two things. So we use leadership development as a vehicle to bring about community well-being in the spirit of Ella Baker. And we do that by focusing on 3 different groups, you could say. So one is young people. So we do a lot of work in the youth development space, particularly through after-school programming, but a whole lot more. We do work with social impact organizations whose work focuses on marginalized, but particularly Black communities. And then we do work directly with communities as well. And so what that looks like is making sure, first and foremost, one of the things that we carry forth from her legacy and from her approach to community organizing was that we listen. So we all, my comrades and I, my co-founders and the folks that other leaders within our organization that we've locked arms with, we all come from Brooklyn and or New York City in some proximity. Our board is 100% from that area as well. And so we're very familiar with the context that we serve, but we don't take for granted that we know exactly what the challenges are in the neighborhoods where we hyper focus our work. So listening is like a huge part of the work and of carrying the spirit of how Ella Baker did what she did. And so I remember even reading her autobiography. This was one of the things that stuck with me. She would be in the room with bunches of young people, and they would look to her because she's this, elder. She has this wisdom. She's done so much, and they would ask her questions, and she would not answer. I mean, she would let them lead, right? So this is one of the things that we carry forth tremendously, not only in the work that we do with those three groups that I mentioned, but even amongst ourselves as leaders within the organization, when we communicate with one another, when we are planning for whatever we're doing, we make space to listen to one another, to make sure that we're hearing each other. And this trickles out to the folks that we serve. We take up the mantle of servant leadership, and we take it up very, very intently, passionately, and devotedly. It means service in the truest sense of the word. And so we're just always looking for ways that we can serve. But we know the best way to do that is not to go in and think that we know what communities need to be better, but instead to take a pause and to make sure that we're listening, and not just listening to anybody either, making sure that we're connected to the right people in the spaces that we serve to understand what is necessary, and then understand how we can be a vehicle of change toward whatever it is the needs are there. And so that in short, that is how we do what we do, and how we approach it, and how we make sure that Ella Baker's spirit and legacy is alive in pretty much everything that we endeavor to accomplish.
Is there a particular program that y'all run that you want to highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. The what we call our flagship program is the Young People's Leadership Cooperative. And it is an after-school program that basically allows young people to, to first connect, right? So again, this idea of relationship building, which is another core component of Ella Baker's work. So, you could be in a space, and in this example, in a school building, and not know your fellow classmates in any kind of, intimate or intentional way. And or have relationships. Like I'll ask my children even, like, well, what school is so and so going to, or what do they do on the weekend? And I don't know. I'm like, well, what do y'all talk about? So we create space for young people to really just connect with each other. We start our programs off by allowing them to break bread. So we bring in fresh meal and just invoke that power of food as a way to connect. And then from there, we infuse the space with ways for them to explore identity development. So what it means to be a young Black person in today's age, in their particular context, in their particular community. And then we position them rather to study what's happening in their community and isolate one challenge that is of paramount importance to them. And then we empower them or equip them, I should say, with resources to address whatever challenges that might come up for them. So as an example, some young people in the past have isolated gun violence. And in fact, Stacey and I were able to bring one of the young people from YPLC, Young People's Leadership Cooperative, onto our podcast to talk about the work that he was doing in his school and in his community around gun violence. Young people have addressed, food injustice, just all kinds of different challenges. So the idea is that we use community organizing as a tool or the principles of community organizing as a tool to elevate the critical thinking of young people to understand what's going on in their community, what's going on in their spaces, and furthermore, what they can do to create change in those spaces. And the idea is that they not only get sort of those principles of community organizing, of leadership, of critical thinking, but also some exposure to possible career paths that they can take. And most of our young people that we've served in the middle grade, so middle school, and then we've worked with elementary schools, and now we're working with high school students. But understanding that wherever you are on that K-12 spectrum, you have within you the power to think critically, to make change, and to think about your path ahead in terms of a possible career and ways that you can be an asset to your community. So that really is, that program is really the hallmark of why we do what we do, particularly as former educators and parents and people who love the spaces that we come from.
Now, is this a year-round thing? And do they come like every day or just once a week? How does that work?
Yeah, it is a school year based program, and they come once so 5 days a week after school. And one of our ultimate goals, I should say, is that we're taking the work that we're doing in the after school space, and it's almost like we're incubating to see what possibilities lie there when you just give young people the space to lead. And ultimately, we will turn the work that happens there into a full-fledged school model so that it extends not just from the after-school space, but into the entire school experience that a young person might have when they walk into a school building. So that's part of one of our next steps in terms of expanding our work. But for right now, yes, it is in an after-school space, 5 days a week, currently in Brooklyn, New York.
How many kids do you think that you have gone through the program? Just off
at this stage, I would say we're about maybe 400 to 450, somewhere in that range, students. And again, that spans from, I would say, probably the third grade, realistically, all the way up to high school, with the majority of them being in the middle grade, 6 through 8.
Wow. All right. For the work that you are doing, which one is the most important? Community, civic engagement, or creativity?
That's tough, Erik. That is tough. But community, civic engagement, or creativity. Whew. Well, you absolutely need all three. You do. But you're forcing me to choose one, and so I will. Oh, you're not forcing me. You're asking me to choose one, and so I will. I will say community. I can't not say it. I want to say creativity because it's really essential, especially in these times. I think these times call for us to be innovative and to be right-brained. But I would say that community is really the most necessary driving force because, if you're not focused on the people, you could easily get caught up in lots of other things that do not serve you or others, for that matter. So I think I can't divorce myself from that. And the power of community, as I've seen it throughout my life in different ways, it's crucial, especially now where we live in a time where gadgets and phones and laptops and things kind of drive pretty much everything. It can be divisive. It can be divisive. So I see community as a force, a vehicle, a space, and that space could be both physical and non-physical, that where power can really be held collectively to bring about change. So I would say community is most important.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Ms. Baker wanted to make sure that the voices of Black women were heard during the Civil Rights Movement. But your early work involved getting more Black men into education, especially in classrooms. Why is that so important?
Woo, I used to get asked this question a lot. And yeah, for me, there are a few things at play. One, the teaching force is predominantly white and female. Mostly white women are teachers in this country, has been for quite some time. So that's one. So there's a need for more Black teachers, period, and more teachers of color in general, but more specifically for Black teachers. So that's one part. As my partner likes to say, that's camera A, right? So we got that on camera A. Camera B, we have the fact that our schools are predominantly made up of children of color, right? So, and there have been bunches of studies that show that students benefit, no matter their race, no matter their ethnicity, when you have Black teachers, one, and when teachers more specifically look like them. Okay. So that's the other part. The other piece is that teaching for a long time has been considered women's work, right? So to that notion, majority of the teaching force is made up of women, all right? So we have the race piece, we have the gender piece. The other piece that's really more personal for me is that I used to teach a special ed. And in a special ed context, majority of those students were Black boys. And so if you combine what I've just shared, you understand that it's important for those Black boys specifically who are among the most marginalized in our school buildings to have teachers that look like them. I was blessed to be in a space where majority of my comrades, my co-teachers who taught the same students that I did were Black men. But I knew this was an anomaly. But I would see firsthand the power that those Black men had in the classroom with all of the students, but specifically with Black boys, and not just with my special ed class where I had a class of 12, but with the other classes that I was blessed to teach. And so, but I also knew what the research and what the statistics said. So I was just very, very curious about the experiences that Black men were having as teachers, also knowing that when you connect back to their experiences as students, a lot of them didn't have positive experiences in schools, right? If you think about, the fact that most teachers are white and female, they didn't get an opportunity to see people who look like them in school buildings. So I wanted to, one, highlight this need, but also understand from the perspective of Black men what that experience was like. So I focused a great deal of my career in that stage, from transitioning out of the classroom into higher ed and into policy work and program work around teacher diversity. I focus a lot of my energy on Black men and getting more of them into the field because our children need them.
Yeah. I was sitting there thinking the first Black male teacher I had was my junior year in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my chemistry professor. And he thought that I was the second coming of chemistry. He was trying to convince me to be a chemist and all that stuff. And, it was just, just the support that he gave,
Right.
and it meant something. I mean, there were Black teachers at my school, not at my elementary school, but at my high school. But he was the very first one that I had to have a class with. And so, it just highlights the fact that, and our school was basically like 97% Black. The only other ethnicity we had was AAPI. And so, just that fact alone, even at a school where the majority of the kids, and it was a school where you literally had to take a test to get in. We didn't have that kind of representation. We had a lot of white females. We even had a husband and wife team. You know what I'm saying? It was just that kind of thing. So it's real. What you're talking about is what I'm trying to testify to.
Yep.
Miss Baker said, give light and people will find the way. How can public policy give light?
That is one of our absolute favorite Ella Baker quotes. So thank you for bringing it into our conversation here. I talked about it a moment ago, and I think this is one of the things that gets missed. You asked me that question earlier about our previous administration, and I would say this applies to any administration. Public policy can give light by first listening. the people who are at the helm of making policy need to listen. And listening doesn't involve getting people in a room and hearing what they have to say. It involves really intentionally getting to the heart. So Ella Baker talked about the concept of what it means to be radical. And she pointed out that being radical means getting to the root of a thing. And to me, there's so many jewels and gems that she offered to us. And this is one that also sticks with me in my core. So we think about what it means to be radical, and even for my math brains out there, when you think about, you find the square root of a number, right? You put the radical sign, and this is to me is the heart of what is necessary to get policy passed that actually serves people, to get to the root of the challenges that people are facing, and to understand how to connect those challenges with policy that will actually improve the conditions of the people and what actually can help them and position them to really activate their own power. And to me, this is what light is. It's power. It's a power source, and we all have it. We all have it. The challenge is that there's so many, in part, the way that capitalism lives in this country and works in this country, some get to activate that power where others don't. And so the way that we give light through policy is by being able to get to the root of the why and to create policy that actually addresses the gaps that come about because of what's there at that root. If you think about a tree, I like to think about, and we actually, our logo for the Ella Baker Institute is a tree in the spirit of this idea of, if you think about an oak tree, I studied nature as part of like my strategy building at a point, and it's something I love to bring to folks and to organizations. There's a sister, Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about the ways that nature can inform us in the work that we do. And so you think about oak trees have roots. They don't go so deep as much as they go wide, and they connect to one another. And so they create networks where they're able to communicate with each other, trees. So if this one tree is ill, the soil and the roots combine to create pathways to heal that tree. And I think it's just a profound notion that trees, these static figures in our environment, and they're doing so much for us, but also for each other, and that they connect and they communicate. They look like they're not, but they're doing so much. But it's that connectivity at the root that gets them to be around well beyond the years that we have here on this earth as humans. And so I think this is part of what I think policy is meant to do, and how it is meant to be a vehicle for change and for improvement, and for transformation in our communities and the lives of our people.
That's the challenge of politics, is that, and governing, is that the most effective time for listening is after the election. When people are running for office, they're basically selling you something, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to sell you some hope, or in some cases fear, but they're trying to sell you something. And so the candidates are not listeners, but projectors.
Mm-hmm.
But once you take that oath and get in, that's when the listening part really becomes a valuable tool or a weapon even.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
And so the problem is that we could have a great salesman, but a terrible listener. And that usually is what happens most of the time. And that leads to the frustration that people have with politics. And that could be a whole nother show. So don't go off on that tangent. Just listening to you, that's why I was thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's close out the interview. The previous guests had to answer these same questions. So I'm be fair and ask them to you, because it's kind of the theme of the episode. So the first question is, do you want things for Black folks to be better, easier, or more impactful?
You asked the hard questions, boy. Better, easier, or more impactful? Mm, mm. It's interesting because what I thought I would say is not what I'm actually going to say. No, it is what I'm going to say. It is what I'm going to say. So I was going to say easier because I'm all about ease, especially as I age. I want things to be easy. And I think about my people. We've struggled and toiled for centuries. We need ease. But then, yeah, I think about the work, and I'm not sure that growth can happen when things are easy. And growth is necessary because if you're not growing, you're dying. So I'm not sure that that's my response. I want to say impactful because I think that when I think about the word impactful, I think it's more all encompassing of things like transformation, things like growth, things like change, things like things that become better, right? So I think it encompasses more holistically what I think we need as people. So I'll go in.
And, and like I told the other guests, it's not a gotcha question, but
Yeah.
I'm with the easier part. And I use my sports brain for it. And,
Yeah.
it's like when they finally gave Jackie Robinson the opportunity to play, he did what anybody else would do. That's great. And that is every 10 at bats, he got 3 times he got a hit. If you are 3 for 10 throughout your whole career, you are considered a legend in baseball, right? And so once the door was open and other athletes were given that opportunity, well, look at all these young black men that have become Hall of Famers, right?
Mm.
And it's like, and my thing is, if you just get out of my way, if you just allow me, if you give me the same opportunity, if you ease these restrictions, if you ease this racism, I can show you what I can do. The concern that you have about ease maybe not being a challenge, then the challenge is not so much external to me, is internal. Because every athlete that every great athlete that I've encountered has always said, but I can do one better. You know what I'm saying? It was one thing for Michael Jordan to say, well, I won a championship and that's it. You know what I'm saying? But it's like now, no, I want to get the second one.
Right.
And when you got the second one, it's like, can I get a third one? You see what I'm saying? It's like at that point, it's like, what can I do to keep staying at this particular level or even to get better? And so, but there was no restriction to him saying, well, you can't dribble this way or you can't wear your shorts that way or, yeah, we're going to limit the black players to so many. There were no restrictions. It was just like, here's the rules. Here's everything. Do what you do. And that, when people talk about equal playing field, it's like, it's more than just equals about equity. Cause it's like, I want to be, cause equal could mean different things, right? If one of my favorite pictures was a box, like people trying to look over a fence. And so, if you had the boxes all equal, then the shortest person couldn't see over the fence. If you did equity based on the person's height, then everybody could look over the fence, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that's why I tend to go toward, if the question was asked to me, I would tend to go through easy, but there's no wrong answer.
Of course.
But when I thought about it, I said, that might be the question of our moment. What do we want? Because there's always been a question about Black agenda. But again, this is your interview, not my speech. So let me get to the last question. Finish this sentence.
Okay.
I have hope because
I have children. Because I have children. I must. I can't not. And even if I didn't, I would know children. I would have children in my community, and therefore I must have hope. There has to be something better, easier, and more impactful left for them. And so therefore I must positively, absolutely have hope and build something from that place so that I'm not just living off hope, because hope can get you but so far. but that I'm working towards actually creating the thing that I'm hoping for.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. So the Ella Baker Institute, EBI, as you refer to it, is a nonprofit,
Yep.
is it not?
It is a nonprofit organization, indeed.
So how can people donate to that? How can people get more information about it? Go ahead and make.
Yeah. So if you go to our website, www.ellabakerinstitute.org, you will find the link where we would more than happily accept your generous donations to our efforts to serve young people, to serve communities with a hyper focus on Black communities. And you can also check us out on Instagram at Ella Baker Institute, one word. And we'd be happy to connect with you all. So please reach out to us, particularly those of you who are in schools, who work with young people, who are in organizations, or anyone just interested in learning more about the great ancestor, Ella Baker, and contributing in any way, financially or otherwise. Please, we would love to hear from you.
And this is the holiday season, which means this is the giving season.
It is giving season.
So keep the Ella Baker Institute in mind.
Please do.
Dr. Patrice Fenton, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really was honored to have you come on and to be able to at least talk to you twice this year. And and hopefully this will be, because the rule is, once you have been on the show, you have an open invitation to come back. So I understand there may be a reason that you can come back. So we need to make sure that you do.
Indeed. And thank you so much for the time and the opportunity, for your platform and for your voice. It is much appreciated. I am, as the season is, but always, as I started out saying, in the space of gratitude. So thank you.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. And so I want to thank Dr. Marlee Bunch, Dr. Patrice Fenton for coming on the podcast. Greatly appreciate them doing that as the holiday season was kicking into high gear. And with Dr. Bunch, make sure that you find a way to get those books, The Magnitude of Us and Unlearning the Hush. And she's got another book that we kind of mentioned in the interview dealing with leveraging AI. So if you're a teacher, The Magnitude of Us and Leveraging AI would be good books to get to kind of have a better grasp of teaching children, especially Black children in this day and age. And so, from a historical perspective and dealing with the technology. But Unlearning the Hush kind of gives the backstory of The Magnitude of Us, how she came up with the curriculum, or I think the technical term is pedagogy, to teach these children. So I hope that you would support her as far as her writing endeavors. And then with Dr. Fenton, the Ella Baker Institute, the work that they're doing with young people, after school program, try to teach them leadership skills and make them well-rounded individuals, regardless of what their career path is. Better citizens, better community leaders, all that. It's a worthwhile project. It's worthwhile and nonprofit to donate to. So as I said in the interview, this is the giving season. If you want to donate to those organizations, you can do that. So as I'm recording this, like I said, we're getting ready to start 2026. And, President has decided to go after ISIS in Nigeria. And on Christmas Day, he decided to drop bombs in Nigeria. Now, to be objective, if it's a situation where you're going after a terrorist organization and ISIS is a terrorist organization, the president has that authority to have strategic attacks on terrorist organizations. That goes all the way back to legislation and authority that was given after 9/11. So if you're biased toward a president like I am, you kind of always have some skepticism behind it. And of course, the timing of it to do it on Christmas, it is what it is. But to be fair, he has that authority to do that. And if it is substantiated that they have been targeting Christians in the country of Nigeria, and it seems like that he had some kind of communications with the Nigerian government before this attack happened. Maybe they okayed it. Maybe they encouraged it. I don't know, because this administration is not as transparent as they advertise. But if he hadn't done any of the other crazy stuff prior to this, you'd have to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. It's just really, you want to bomb people on Christmas, right? And I just kept thinking about the Stevie Wonder song, Someday at Christmas. One of his lyrics is, there'll be no more war, right? So there's that. But, it just reminds me that a new year is coming, and we have a chance as citizens to continue to send a message of resistance to this administration. As much as they don't like it, as much as their egos are hurt and bruised by it. The reality is that a majority of the American people don't like what's going on. They don't like the messages coming from the White House. They don't like the appearance of the White House, the destruction of the White House. Black unemployment is on the rise. Costs are going up. Healthcare is going up. And that's something I'm personally dealing with, because I had an episode, I guess about a couple of months ago. And so, it's a reality that all of us have to face. And there's bills to be paid, and, you're trying to, you got to eat. And those of us who still have children in the house, we got to take care of them. If you got pets, you got to take care of your pets, right? I mean, just education, all that stuff. There's just so many things that people every day are dealing with. And while they don't want the government to totally interfere with that, if the government can help them out, they would greatly appreciate it. If there is a way to reduce costs, they would like to see the government do that. If there's a way to ease financial burden, people would like to see the government do that. Because, that's where the stress comes from. That's where the anger comes from. There's a desire in every human being to be the best that they can be, and to live abundantly, live a lifestyle where they're comfortable, right? Now, greed kicks in when you want to exceed that, and depression kicks in when you don't think that there's a way for you to do it, right? And so, in order to have a balance, people need to feel that they're worth something. And for a lot of people, that's income. And so we have to be sensitive to that. And, when you have somebody in office who pretends to have wealth or travels in those kind of circles, the worst thing that could happen is that you get somebody that's not empathetic to people that are not in that circle. I was just talking to, I think I was some relatives over the holidays, and of course politics came up in the conversation. And, one of the things I was talking about was, comparing our current president with a wealthy president, even though it was before my time, it wasn't that far away. I mean, when I was born, President Kennedy hadn't been dead 2 years. And, comparing Trump to Kennedy, since he decided to make that comparison for all of us by putting his name on the Kennedy Center, they had a different mindset about their wealth, regardless of how they got it, right? Because a lot of us know that, the old man Kennedy was involved in the bootlegging of alcohol back in the day. That's where they got a substantial amount of their wealth. But it was always instilled in them to do something. And I think that's why when President Kennedy gave his inaugural address and he said, not ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That was instilled in them as a family, that a country that gave them an opportunity to be wealthy, the least they could do was to give service, whether that was in the military, whether it was in politics, nonprofits, whatever. And as flawed as any human being can be, despite all that, they exemplify that. They've done that. We can't say that about the Trump family. And that's the difference. When you hear me say the phrase, we're not doing capitalism right in America, that's what I'm talking about, right? There's nothing wrong with people making money. There's nothing wrong with people becoming wealthy and successful in business. There's a problem with greed. There's a problem with hoarding. There's a problem with being not being empathetic. There's a problem with not being sympathetic. There's a problem with discriminating, right? I mean, we understand that levels of wealth creates levels of access. We get that. And there's some people that, hey, be nice. I was a member of a club per se at one time in my life, and it has perks, but it's not my definition of life. It's an experience of life, but it's not a definition. My status is not me. What I have access to, it's not me. And so when I had that status, I still was Erik, and maybe to my detriment I was, but I am who I am. And I still believe that people, when they need help, should get it. I believe that if you have the capacity and the heart to serve, you should serve and give back to a nation that has given you everything. So it shouldn't matter if you're the richest person in the world or you're the poorest person in the world. If you have a heart to give, if you have a heart to serve, then you should do that. And, you don't have to give up everything, because there is a need to have self-preservation, whether you're the richest or the poorest person. But at the same time, whatever you got, you can't take it with you. And, I know there was ancient cultures, and that's why the pyramids were built, so the pharaohs could have all the stuff that they have when they and travel with the afterlife. Yeah, that's not how that works. Whatever wealth you had will be distributed amongst your heirs, or if you're not protected, be distributed through the state, right? That's the reality of life. You can't take any of this with you. Even if Elon Musk manages to become a trillionaire, he can't take $1 trillion into heaven or hell, wherever he's going, right? And so, that means that what's more valuable is what you offer, right? What service did you provide? What did you give to help your fellow man? And even if it's limited, right? We were talking about some people being upset about gifts they got at Christmas. And, my attitude is like, it's the thought that counts, right? It's about gratitude. I never forget, I was dating a girl, and there's two sides to this story, but I was dating a girl, and she fixed me breakfast, and she burnt the food. I think she burnt the toast or whatever. And I was not happy about that. I was like, it's burnt. I can't eat that. And so my best friend, he kind of overheard me say that, and he was admonishing me about not being grateful. because she could have not even cared enough to even fix me anything. And I had to tell him, I said, I understand where you're coming from. I said, but you're white and I'm black. So let me tell you what that means to me, right? As a black person, we should be grateful for the fact that we have been able to have our rights evolve in this nation. We have come from being people kidnapped from our native land and being enslaved in another to being in positions where we could have any job in society we want, whether we wanted to be a $1 million athlete, a lawyer, a doctor, hell, even president of the United States or a Supreme Court justice. We've done all of this stuff within the span of 400 years, right? Educators and welders and, farmers and not just, farmers for our thing, but I mean, we're like, you can find black people in the whole journey from farm to table, right? So we've evolved in that sense, but we have to be careful about our gratefulness. And so I told him, it's like, white folks give us stuff. And, in some cases, we've been able to take the scraps that you gave us and make it a full course meal, right? And then there's other times you've given us something and it has no bearing on us moving forward as a people, moving forward as a nation, even. And so, it's all right. And I should acknowledge the fact that she made me the toast, but I have the right to be displeased that it's not edible. The act should be commended, but the end result is I still didn't have anything to eat, right? And you can take that either way you want to, but my position is that if you're going to give, if you're going to be of service, then it has to be productive. It can't be performative. It can't be hollow, right? And so when I look at what the Kennedys did and what they're still doing, it's like they're trying to do something to uplift people, right? Whether it's creating affirmative action or eliminating poverty or the Special Olympics or anything else that they've been involved in, right? The Kennedy Center to uplift the arts in America. Those things are beneficial to humans. They're beneficial to the nation. They're beneficial to society. But if you just want to be president just because you can put that on your resume or that allows you to make more money than you were making when you were just a regular citizen, that doesn't help us, and it doesn't help to have people around him that don't try to guide him in a way where he could do something. It's one thing if you help a Nicki Minaj or a Kim Kardashian, but what are you going to do to help California? What are you going to do to help Trinidad, the nation, right? There's a difference. What are you going to do about, it's one thing to get people out of jail. It's another thing to change the criminal justice system, right? You can have concepts of any plan you want. Concepts don't get it done. You have to have a plan of action and you have to act on your plan, right? In order for it to have any kind of impact, in order to provide the service, in order to give something to help people. If you want to bomb ISIS in Nigeria, Mr. President, you have that authority to do that. But what's the next step? How are you going to help the country in Nigeria, which is one of the wealthiest countries in the nation, by the way, in the world, by the way. But how are you going to help Nigeria? Are you going to help with some infrastructure development? You're going to compete with China to make sure that our presence is there so that we have an ally. I mean, it's more than just performative acts. Would those Christians in Nigeria, if they felt that they were being persecuted still, even after, because you've proven that they've been persecuted by you've taken action, So if they apply for a visa or apply for asylum in the United States, are you going to let them in? Right? Because the Nigerian Christians are black. So are you going to let them in? All I'm saying is in this season where we talk about the greatest gift for those of us who are Christian, the greatest gift that was ever given to mankind was the birth of Jesus Christ. We celebrate that during this time of year, regardless of whether it was a pagan holiday or not initially. We've chosen this time to celebrate that gift. And so during that time, it's more than just making sure that your child has the latest Xbox or PS5 or PlayStation, whatever number they're on now. It's about teaching why gift giving is important. We're in Kwanzaa season now, so Habar Gane to everybody. It's about celebrating the first fruits of the harvest. It's about respecting the ancestors. It's about teaching the community the values you need to build a stronger community, right? It's not about anything else. Yeah, I don't have time to enumerate all of the criticisms, but you see where I'm going. So I'm hoping that as 2026 approaches, that all of us, regardless if you're black or not, all of us go into this mindset of what can I give? How can I better serve my people and my nation? And since this is a political show, who do we vote for? Do we vote for the same type of people? Or do we vote for somebody that espouses true American leadership, which is about service and about giving, right? That's the mindset we need to go into 2026. We have to find the true servant leaders, the true Americans that really believe that this is one nation under God, that it's truly a land where all men are created equal, that we have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the people that we need to vote for. And not just this election, but from every election afterward, going forward, right? We have to set that standard. On the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence being signed and sent to the King of England, where the colonists told the king, yeah, we don't want to be a part of the empire anymore. We want to set forth our own path. We want to take care of each other. We don't want to bow down to one man. We want to live our lives independent and free, right? We need to elect people who get that. Anybody else that's talking about anything else, we ain't got time for that. I have always made the case that if you just leave black folks alone, we'll be fine. You stop telling us where to go to the bathroom, what water fountain to drink out of, what part of the bus to sit on, what school we can go to, what sport we can play, what access do we have, what our credit score is, what law school we go to. If you stop restricting us, just let us live our lives, we'll be great. And I promise you, that little 13, 14% of the nation we represent would do wonders for you. If you want to end crime in the inner city, stop putting restrictions on folks where they can't leave. We literally had a promotion in this nation, which was exacerbated by a columnist. And we came up with this phrase, the manifest destiny, right? That, we wanted the country to expand. We wanted the people to go out and find a place to live and thrive. We encourage that. That's why we can say in America, the beautiful from sea to shining sea, right? We encourage that. But we denied that to the Native Americans. We denied that to Black Americans after enslavement. We're trying to deny it now to anybody that wasn't born in the United States, even though there's no way this country could exist without immigrants. So we need to elect people who get the big picture, when we vote on the first Tuesday of November in 2026, that vote should be a second declaration. Not a declaration of independence, but a declaration of freedom. It's that we stand here today to choose leadership that will take America to the next level, where we double down on our commitment, our creed, if you will, that everybody can live a life that's abundant and free, that people can really have the liberty to do what they want, love who they want, be who they want to be, and be productive in society, and to pursue what makes us happy, whether it's a house, whether it's a job, whether it's a car, whether it's a career, a college, whatever we want to pursue, we should be allowed to do that, right? Now, far be it from me to encourage people to do illegal stuff, not including that in the package, because, with great power comes great responsibility, right? But we need to put people in office that demand that we finally live up to what we expressed to an empire 250 years ago, what we wanted to be, what this nation should be about. And so people like President Trump and his sycophants can have a voice in the public square. But in order for us to move forward, we gotta have people that can temper that with other voices, and preferably voices of reason, right? So we can move forward and everybody can excel. That's my hope. That's my wish for 2026. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year to everybody. I'm hoping that individually your 2026 will be a prosperous one. And I pray that as a nation, collectively, it'll be a prosperous one as well. And we will set a foundation for a new direction. All right. Thank you all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.